Starting us off in at number 10, Harvey Dent. While Batman may have very little respect for Two-Face, Bruce Wayne did have respect for the man that the villain once was, Harvey Dent. Yes, we are starting off our list with one of those numbers. Harvey Dent, before his incursion with the mob boss Sal Maroni and acid that Sal's gang members threw at him, was once an upstanding citizen of Gotham, the Gotham City District Attorney, who could not be corrupted and fought for justice with the same kind of relentlessness that Batman incorporated into his crime fighting. Except, you know, he did it the legal way. As you can imagine, that pissed off a whole lot of criminals in the underbelly of Gotham who could not buy Dent's compliance. Dent was a man that Bruce highly respected, which makes facing off against Two-Face particularly difficult at first for the Dark Knight. Moving on to number 9, Mr. Freeze. When Mr. Freeze, aka Victor Fries, first appeared in the comics, he was known as an ice-based criminal called Mr. Zero, kinda a joke villain, who debuted in Batman issue 121 in 1959. He wouldn't become Mr. Freeze until the character was adapted to the 60s Batman TV series starring Adam West, and later in Detective Comics issue 373 in 1968, he would eventually officially show up as Freeze in the DC panels. A cryogenics expert who lived in Gotham, Victor was attempting to cure his terminally ill wife Nora when an accident occurred that lowered his body temperature to sub-zero levels, causing him to wear his cryogenic suit in order to keep living. At the end of the day, depending on the version of the character that you're looking at, Freeze didn't turn to crime because he wanted power. He committed crimes out of necessity to save the woman he loves, or his crimes are a reaction to the tragedy of his loss. Still bad, but at least for a somewhat noble reason. Sort of. Freeze in recent years has been portrayed as a character in rehabilitation, one that, despite being in Arkham, has admitted that he's trying to be better, and that is something that Batman can get behind. In at number 8, the Riddler. You gotta give it to the Riddler. Dude is a next level genius when it comes to elaborate schemes and puzzles. Edward Nygma, one of Batman's most enduring criminal mastermind foes, first appeared in Detective Comics issue 140 in 1948, and prides himself on his intellectual superiority. And while Bruce may despise him, may constantly find himself fighting against the villain and besmirching his name, at the end of the day, he's gotta respect anyone who gives his brain something to think about, and can manage to puzzle him. That is not something any old villain can do. Tricking Bruce Wayne may come at a price, but it's definitely a feat that the Riddler is proud of, and something that Bruce can at least acknowledge. Moving on to number 7, Talia al Ghul. Talia is Ra's al Ghul's daughter, a villain that was first introduced in Detective Comics issue 411 in 1971, who quickly became a love interest of Batman's. She's also the mother of his son, Damian Wayne, the 5th Robin. But aside from that connection, she's also saved Bruce's life on multiple occasions, helping him from time to time. And another reason why she's often more respected by the Dark Knight than other villains is due to the fact that her crimes are often in the name of her father rather than her own personal gain. Talia is often morally ambiguous, but in recent times, she's become a bit more of a villain, even leading the League of Assassins. Hard to let that one slide. In at 6, Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor is traditionally a Superman villain. He's the Man of Steel's arch nemesis, first appearing in Action Comics issue 23 in 1940 as a mad scientist. Over time, his character became more complex, making him a wealthy, power-hungry business mogul, and a well-known public figure who sees Superman as a threat to the existence of humanity. But despite all this, Lex and Bruce share something in common, aside from being absolute geniuses. They both understand the dangers that Superman poses. Lex is obviously a bit more extreme about the whole thing, whereas Bruce is like, yeah, I'm just gonna secretly carry around kryptonite and have a bunch of backup plans established just in case the Man of Steel ever loses his shit. Which, to be fair, has happened multiple times, primarily in alternate universes or alternate Earths in the DC multiverse. Bruce is just more low-key about the thing, whereas Lex constantly whips up evil schemes to take down Superman. And despite their methodologies varying wildly, it's without a doubt that Bruce has an understanding of Lex that others may not, and he may even secretly respect him for it. It's like, nah, I'll just have kryptonite on me at all times, no big. In at number 5, Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy has always been a villain with a point. She has a noble purpose. She wants to protect the environment and safeguard it. Except the way in which she does is arguably a little extreme, like eco-terrorism extreme. Over the years, her and Batman have had their fair share of conflict, and of course, because she is a woman, sexual tension. But at the end of the day, Batman knows she's not a villain who threatens humanity in the ways that others in his rogue gallery do. He's come to her aid in the past, like during the No Man's Land story arc, and the two even worked together in the 2004 story Poison Ivy Casts Shadows to take down a criminal attempting to frame Ivy. By the end of the story, Ivy returns to Arkham for rehabilitation, and Batman has sent a bunch of flowers to her cell as a gift. Oh, he has a heart. The girl's like, I just want some plants, which then she might actually use to break out of Arkham, but besides the point. Noble at heart. She's even helped him withstand toxins from other villains, like making him immune to Scarecrow's fear gas. These days, Poison Ivy is actually pretty good, alongside her girlfriend Harley Quinn, often aiming to do the right thing, although their means of getting there is somewhat questionable. Speaking of, in at 4, Harley Quinn. Batman and Harley Quinn have worked together a handful of times. One of the most recent times comes in the form of the animated film, aptly titled Batman and Harley Quinn. The film follows their attempts to stop a scheme of Poison Ivy's and the Floronic Mans of turning humans into plant-esque monsters like the Swamp Thing. Funny thing is, when Harley isn't working with the Joker, Batman has had multiple opportunities in which he could have easily had her locked up in Arkham, but he did not act on them. Maybe that's because he sees her as a harmless person without her homicidal love interest. Maybe he understands the kinds of things that an obsession with the Joker does to a person, or perhaps he just sees the potential for good in her. But regardless, he seems more inclined to see her rehabilitated rather than anything else. The two even worked together in the Injustice universe, with them being major allies by the time Injustice 2 rolled around. Plus, for good measure, there's been plenty of times where Harley has chosen to let Batman go or not get in his way at all, and that's something he can at least not do. Moving on to another badass woman, in at 3, Catwoman. Dude almost married her, so yeah, kinda goes without saying that he respects her. Alright, let's backtrack for a sec. Traditionally, Catwoman, aka Selina Kyle, is a villain. Her first appearance in the Dark Knight comic was Batman issue 1 from 1940, and ever since she's had a major love-hate relationship with the broody hero. Her romantic attraction always being a struggle for Bruce in the early days before the Comics Code Authority cracked down on that. He would occasionally let her get away, and flirting with someone who was villainous or a criminal is something the code was like no bueno about. Her anti-hero days arguably began in the 90s, with her actions often being described as her doing the wrong things, but for the right reasons. Kinda like Robin Hood, but in a catsuit and with a whip. You can see why she'd earned the Dark Knight's adoration. In at 2, Ra's al Ghul. Ra's and Batman have a complicated history with one another. Ra's has done things like attempt to commit mass genocide by releasing deadly viruses in Gotham. You can see why Batman would not be okay with that. He once exhumed the corpses of Bruce's parents to distract Batman in JLA Tower of Babel. Also something Batman was most definitely not okay with. And Ra's also once left his other daughter Nyssa in a Nazi concentration camp. Dude! All in all, he's pretty darn bad as far as villains go. In Detective Comics issue 411 from 1971, Batman falls in love with his daughter, Talia, and Ra's begins to see him as a possible heir, figuring out Batman's secret identity, and then puts him through some tests. While Bruce rejects his offer of being his heir, since, you know, genocide, not a big fan of that. The two still manage to share a mutual respect for one another, mostly because of each other's intellectual prowess. But most importantly, Ra's is a villain who knows Batman's true identity and has never exposed him or threatened to reveal that information since it goes against his code of honor. That being said, he did use that knowledge to fight Batman and gain an advantage in certain ways, but none of which threatened to expose him though. Gotta give it to him, that actually is a pretty cool thing to do. Finally, in at number 1, Bane. Bane is one of Batman's most relentless adversaries. For starters, he's brilliant, and we all know how much Bruce respects foes with intelligence that rivals his own and gives him a challenge. Bane is also a foe who has followed through on his threats, and even managed to break Batman's back, a near fatal attack that Bruce eventually recuperated from after a whole lot of story arc drama, that is. Funny enough though, on occasion, Batman and Bane have actually worked together. In the Arkham City comics and the game that they're based off of, Batman and Bane worked together to track down shipments of chemicals. In the comics, issue 738 of Detective Comics sees Batman and Bane working together during the No Man's Land event. Lex Luthor almost buys Gotham and hires Bane to work for him until Batman shows up and convinces the hulking foe otherwise. And that's something Batman can respect. Bane may be a villain, but he's not beyond logic, something that he proves time and time again to the Dark Knight. He also went after Ra's al Ghul once upon a time in his Lazarus Pits. Not because Batman asked him to, but because he had his own beef with Ra's. But the foe of a foe is a friend, right?
Number 10, Cheetah. Oddly enough, Batman is a guy that seems to be pretty full of compassion and sympathy for villains at times. In the Justice League animated series, it is the respect that he shows for Cheetah when listening to her plight about how she was forced to experiment on herself due to a lack of continued funding to put towards her research, paying for proper test subjects. It's a respect and sympathy that he shows towards her that helps him to actually get free from captivity in the episode Injustice for All Part 2. Granted, his kindness towards Cheetah was likely all part of this escape plot, but it could have also come from a sincere place as well. I don't know why it can't be both. Batman is a pretty compassionate individual more often than not, so that's important to keep in mind. Number 9, Kite Man. Kite Man ended up teaming up and helping Batman during the War of Jokes and Riddles. Granted, he wasn't necessarily a super willing ally, but I think Batman still appreciated Kite Man's assistance and felt bad that he had lost his son and was put in such a tough spot between both the Riddler, Joker, and, well, himself. Not only did Batman respect this version of Kite Man more from the Prime Earth continuity, but I think fans also came to respect him more too based on his tragic origins, which also helped to give his whole Kite Man name and image more meaning. For that, he was just pretty ridiculous. And friends, before we move on to the next spot, just a quick reminder to smash that like if you love Batman as much as I love Batman, and to be kind to each other, because that's what Batman would do. Also, if you want to check out our DC list, we got that for even more DC content. Number 8. Talia al Ghul. So I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, Amanda. Didn't Talia assault Batman? How can you put her on this list? Oh my gosh. But although this is an awful thing that happened, I would still say that Batman respects Talia. She is still the mother of his child, and to be honest, he kind of had a weird, bizarrely chill reaction to that whole scenario. Of course, everyone reacts to trauma and assault differently, so I am not judging him. It just seems like he moved past that whole situation pretty quickly. So that was kind of weird. Batman and Talia have had a very bizarre romantic history overall, but Batman has definitely at times both loved and respected her, and she seems to have felt the same way about him. Which is also why that whole thing that happened between them, it doesn't really make a lot of sense based on their characterization in their relationship. Batman even brought Catwoman along with him to meet Talia after Selina and he became engaged because he respected her. There is also the fact that they both have a child together, which I think also fosters some mutual respect between the two. Though I don't think Batman respects the way Talia raised Damian exactly, or the beliefs at least that she raised him with. I do think he's like, no, don't agree with that. Number 7. Two-Face. Before Two-Face was a villain, he was Harvey Dent, Gotham's successful district attorney who was all about catching and convicting criminals in an attempt to keep the citizens of Gotham safe, and in order to make the city a better overall place to live. How nice. He was an upstanding citizen until he was disfigured at the hands of Sal Maroni, who threw acid in his face. On Earth 1, Batman respected Dent so much that when he initially turned to crime as a result of becoming disfigured, he even attempted to talk Two-Face down, encouraging him to seek rehabilitation instead. Dent actually ended up being convinced by Batman too. He got plastic surgery and for a time became a law-abiding citizen once more, until his face got all scarred up again, in an explosion at least. Then he was back to being Two-Face. Number 6. Poison Ivy. While Batman might not always see eye to eye with Ivy, he definitely has some respect for her. There was a time that she escaped prison and seduced wealthy men using her pheromone powers, whose riches she would then steal. However, when Batman learned that the men were ending up dead as a result of a disease that was also slowly killing Ivy as well, he attempted to get her to surrender willingly so that she could be treated. Despite the fact that Ivy is a villain, it's also been implied on a few occasions that she might actually have genuine feelings for Batman, and he for her, to a certain extent at least. The two even worked together somewhat after Gotham was left in ruins following a severe earthquake during the events of No Man's Land. Batman even freed Poison Ivy and the orphans that she had taken in from Clayface, who had imprisoned them. And he was surprised to learn after those events that Ivy cared enough for the orphans to turn herself in when one of them was accidentally poisoned by Ivy in exchange for getting said orphan, Rose, medical attention. He was like, I guess she is still more human than plant. And then Ivy was like, actually, maybe I just want to be a human again. Anyways, it's fine. Ivy's still Ivy now, so she wasn't a human for very long. Number 5. Ra's al Ghul, or Ra's al Ghul. You can say it either way, I think, but yes. Even though Ra's is one of the best at being bad around, Batman can still level with Ra's. Both respect one another as adversaries and have even teamed up before. Ra's is such a powerful and intelligent character that Batman can see the value of him whenever they have a common enemy, but also knows to be very diligent about sharing information with him, as Ra's can also be a deadly opponent. Ra's al Ghul, to this effect, has also almost defeated Batman on more than one occasion. There is also the element of the two at times having a somewhat familial relationship, with Talia kind of being married to Bruce in Ra's eyes. So there is that to consider as well. Though of course if Batman stands against Ra's instead of with him, then this relationship seems to quickly become null and void in his eyes. Also, for those that listen to this back and are like, why is she going between Ra's and Ra's? It's because I like Ra's al Ghul better personally when I'm saying it, but there's a lot of people out there that are Ra's fans, and so I just like to give people a little bit of both, you know what I mean? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Number 4. Clayface. For a time, Clayface was on a path of redemption and was even put on a team by Batman. Of course, this wouldn't last, and in the end he would end up becoming villainous again, but this likely will not stop Batman from trying to get through to him again in the future. After all, Batman has attempted to reach out to Clayface multiple times and convince him that he should be a hero, not a villain. Not only that, but Clayface, even before he was on Batman's assembled team, had teamed up with Batman. So it's clear that these two can sometimes get along, and even come to have respect for one another as allies and partners. Number 3. Harley Quinn. I mean, currently Harley is Batman's new ally, partner, even sidekick if you will. Batman's respect for Harley likely started out from him pitying her somewhat, but then realizing that Harley was one tough cookie who did not actually need his pity. Harley Quinn in her own right has proven to be a more formidable foe even without her attachment to the Joker, when she has struck out on her own. More recently, Harley joined Batman and Catwoman in the fight against Joker during the events of Joker War. Seeing that Gotham was in serious trouble after Joker stole Bruce Wayne's millions, Harley decided to team up with the Bats in an effort to win the city back from the villain. After the war was won and Joker had escaped and seemingly disappeared once more, Harley decided to stay on the straight and narrow a little bit longer, becoming Batman's partner. But I know there's gonna be people too that are like, well then she's not a villain right now, but she's been a villain for a long time. A long time. I don't think she's full hero just yet. Same with this one. Number 2. Phantasm. Oddly enough, although Batman was surprised to find out that Phantasm was actually Andrea Beaumont, his former fiancée, this only made him respect her villainous persona, Phantasm, knowing that it was actually the woman he'd loved behind the mask, even if he couldn't agree with her methods. Andrea became Phantasm to avenge her father's death, and when the two both discovered each other's identity, they found a sort of mutual understanding between them. The major problem Batman had was that Andrea's personal vendetta was being handled in a more villainous way, with her taking an eye for an eye approach against those who had caused her father so much pain, and were ultimately responsible for his demise. She was looking to kill those involved, which of course went against Batman's beliefs and his no-kill rule. Went against his code, his credence if you will. However, in the end, Andrea got away, and it seemed as though Batman was kind of willing to allow her to disappear following her escape. Number 1. Catwoman. We can't really call Catwoman a villain now, I don't think, but it is important to acknowledge that's how she started out in the comics. I actually think Batman's respect helped to bring Selina around and really inspired her to work on a full-on reform for herself, which now has her more aligned with the heroic lifestyle. Although, she still has been known to pull off a caper or two here and there. And even Penguin more recently still considered Catwoman to be one of the villains when he spirited her away to his underground lair to lay low while Joker destroyed the Gotham above. Catwoman and Batman I think both make the other question their identity and morals in a way that makes them each better people as time goes on. It's why they're so great together, whether it be romantically or just in terms of a kick-ass team-up. Time for an honorable mention. We talk a lot about the Joker on this channel, and to be honest, I'm not sure that Batman respects him most of the time. But it is something that I still wanted to bring up because I'm sure there's a lot of Joker fans out there that are like, but what about Joker? What about Joker? Well, we did learn in the 3 Jokers story that Batman at least seems to respect the man that the Joker used to be, enough to make sure that his family is safe, and respects them enough to keep them safe from the villain. There have also been a few times that the Joker was made sane, or at least temporarily appeared sane, and during some of those times Batman has even been shown to sympathize with the villain. For example, in Brave and the Bold issue 191, when the two team up together after Joker is made sane through his emotions, as he grieves the supposed death of his cohort and his friend in crime, the Penguin. They together then sleuth out that Penguin faked his death as part of a heist, and Batman even congratulates Joker on a job well done. He congratulates him. Wow. Number 10. Batmite. Although Batman might often declare that he finds Batmite to be a nuisance, in some respects he must admire the heroic imp-like creature. Batmite was implied to be the image taken by the manifestation of Batman's rational mind. Batmite isn't really so much a villain as he is a trickster who often means well but instead brings about chaos wherever he goes. He has both done much ill and much good for Batman and the Bat family in the past. However, Batman usually was not one to appreciate even the good that Batmite did, as it was often part of Batmite attempting to fix his own wrongdoings. Still, in some regards, Batman must see that Batmite really is just a big fan that means well, based on his mind's manifestation, or potentially Batmite was actually created or resides in Batman's imagination, which should also in theory lead him to getting some respect. Well, at least you'd think. I would respect things that I created out of my own imagination. Number 9. Arkham Knight. While Astrid Arkham hasn't been a major player in the comics yet, she did make a pretty memorable appearance in the Future State line, and it inspired me to go back and take a look at her earlier appearance in the main continuity in Detective Comics. Batman hasn't had a ton of time to really get to know and cross paths with Arkham Knight as she appears in the comics, but it seems based on his reactions and his fight with her in Detective Comics issues 1005 that he sees her as a sympathetic figure. She was basically lied to and in essence kind of brainwashed against Batman, with her whole life and the people and friends that she made growing up at Arkham making her see Batman as Gotham's main villain as opposed to its savior. Batman believes that Astrid is just misguided, and I bet he even has considered that were her perspective shifted, she could possibly make a strong ally. I personally would love to see a team up with Arkham Knight and Batman, I don't know about you. Astrid is a formidable foe who does what she does because she sees herself as the hero of Gotham who must defeat Batman in order to save the city and save its people. Sometimes you gotta save people by blinding them, you know what I mean? It's all in a hero's work, I guess. And friends, before we move on to our next spot, if you are loving this list, if you want more bad lists, if you want to talk more about Batman villains, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. And check out our Batman playlist for even more Bat videos. Is that a thing people say? Now it's a thing. Number 8. DEADSHOT. These two teamed up together after DEADSHOT was contracted to kill Bruce Wayne, with his daughter being held hostage as leverage to make sure he completed that contract. Instead of doing so though, DEADSHOT decided to try and team up with Batman to save his daughter. Aw, I love it. DEADSHOT even promised Batman that he would not kill anyone during the rescue mission. And later, when he was forced to break his promise due to his daughter's life being in immediate danger, DEADSHOT surrendered to Batman. He asked Batman to make sure his daughter was safe and actually agreed to go to jail for breaking his promise and killing someone. DEADSHOT may be a lot of things, but he is also an honorable man, and it is because of this that he earned Batman's respect. I admire that. I love that he's like, I broke the promise, I killed someone, I'll go to jail. That's only fair. Number 7. Katana. Katana was a member of Black Lightning's Outsiders team, and through them ended up teaming up with Batman in the New 52 continuity. But way before that, when she went by a slightly different name as the New Earth version of the character, she was also part of the original Batman and the Outsiders team in volume number 1 of the series. Despite being a member of the Suicide Squad, Katana has mostly been a good or neutral figure. But it's her ties to the Suicide Squad, a team made up of villains primarily for the most part, that allows us to loosely consider her a villain for this list's sake. Okay, I know Katana's not a villain. I know you're all gonna come and you're all gonna say, Katana's not a villain, she's a really good person. I agree with you, but you know, she's at least an anti-hero. She kills people, right? Like, can we at least give her that? So yes, as I said, Katana is good, but she's not against killing people, and at the very least, that would make her an anti-hero. But at the end of the day, she always aims to do what's right and has a ton of honor. Add in that she's a badass who is extremely skilled when it comes to sword fighting and martial arts, having been trained in the ways of a samurai, and it's easy to see how she earned Batman's respect. The only reason she's ranked so low on this list is because, well, she's really more of a hero than a villain most days. I need to just do a Katana list. I just think she's so cool. Have we done a list on her before? I don't know. We need to do that if that hasn't happened. Number 6. Deathstroke. Despite everything that Slade Wilson has done to Batman and the Bat family in the past, Batman still respects the guy. Why? Well, because Deathstroke is really good at what he does, and that Batman can respect. Now when it comes to Deathstroke's work, what he gets done as a mercenary and hired assassin, Batman can't really get behind that as much. So although these two usually end up at odds with one another, they typically move to defeat each other without any fatalities. Now I'm just thinking of Mortal Kombat. At the end of the day, if Batman could figure out a way to bring Wilson over to the good side, he would do so in a heartbeat. Deathstroke is an amazingly skilled fighter. Batman just wishes he would give up the hired killer life. Deathstroke, on the other hand, also admires Batman, but wishes, you know, he'd stop trying to interfere in all his business. He's just trying to do his job, you know? If these two could see eye to eye, and on the rare occasion that they do see eye to eye, they'd make a strong team. Number 5. Bane. Bane is one of those villains that Batman can actually level with. Despite the fact that Bane is a villain who is so iconically known for his defeat of Batman, I also think that part of Batman's respect for Bane plays into the fact that Bane is one of the few villains that was able to defeat him. Batman respects Bane's strength, and I think also sympathizes with the fact that Bane struggled all throughout his youth, growing up in a harsh prison environment ever since he was little, just because of the crimes of his father. Not very fair. Bane believes in making things better for his country, and even almost succeeded in helping his nation politically. He also respects Batman Batman back in his own way, attempting to break Batman a few years ago, but this time with the intention of building him back up. Like, you know, breaking him to make him stronger. You know what I mean? If you love someone, sometimes you gotta break their back and then kill their butler and, you know, make sure they don't get married. I don't know, it's a weird relationship. Number 4. Red Hood. Red Hood is a villain that Batman kind of has to respect, since he was once his young protege, Robin. Jason Todd may go on to become a villain, but even though Batman may not agree with his methods, there is still a lot there for Batman to admire and respect in him. Jason Todd grows up to be a masterful combatant, but besides that, he is also deep down still that headstrong youth that Batman decided to take under his wing. When it comes to Batman's feelings about Jason Todd and Red Hood, there is a lot of pride and a lot of guilt mixed together there, as Batman feels responsible for Jason going down that darker path, but can also appreciate at times the man that Jason Todd has grown into today, especially as while he was once a villain, he's more an anti-hero now, and continuously works towards redemption as he wrestles with his morals and his past. Number 3. Azrael. Despite the fact that Azrael ended up as a villain, Jean-Paul Valley was originally one of the first folks that Batman thought to turn to after Bane broke his back, leaving him unable to take up the mantle of Batman. In the end, of course, this would be a mistake and Batman would end up having to fight and defeat him in order to get the title and the mantle back, but Batman didn't choose him because he had no one else to turn to. He initially thought that Azrael would make a good replacement because he respected him so much. It just turns out that wasn't a great call, you know what I mean? Number 2. Mr. Freeze. You all thought that I forgot Mr. Freeze when I did my part 1 of this list, but no, I did not forget my boy Freezy. I was just saving him for the potential part 2 that is now here. Also, I know no one calls Mr. Freeze Freezy, but I want it to be a thing, so can we make it a thing? The good news is that me saving him for this list means that he gets to qualify for a top spot. Yay! Mr. Freeze obviously has Batman's respect because of the why behind his criminal plots and his plans, the most memorable of which, and the one we're of course talking about here, being his wife Nora. Nora Freeze is the whole reason that Mr. Freeze commits crimes. It's all to try and raise enough money to fund his research to find a cure for the life-threatening disease she suffers from. Mr. Freeze hopes to find a cure and then thaw his wife, who he cryogenically froze to keep her alive, which resulted in the accident that granted him his unique physiology and powers. In the animated universe, although Batman apprehends Mr. Freeze and gets him sent to Arkham Asylum, he also helps to get Ferris Boyle arrested for his crimes, whom Freeze wanted revenge on, blaming him for Nora's ongoing tragic fate. And in the film Batman and Robin, after defeating Mr. Freeze, Batman reveals to him that they managed to stabilize his wife Nora after Poison Ivy attempted to kill her, and he even promises to move Nora to Arkham, where Freeze will be held, so he can continue his research, after Freeze helps him with a cure for Alfred. I like that he appeals to his better nature because Batman's like, look, Mr. Freeze, you weren't always a bad dude, you're kind of a cool guy, we can figure this out. Also, that whole part where he takes a knee, and then you think he's gonna ask him to marry him. I don't know if I was the only person that got that feeling in that movie, but this feels like a marriage proposal thing. Does anybody ship Batman and Mr. Freeze? Let me know in the comments below. Number 1. Lady Shiva. Lady Shiva almost instantly earned the respect of Batman through proving herself a formidable foe and one that could handily beat the hero, if given the chance of course. It was Lady Shiva that Bruce Wayne turned to after his back had been broken by Bane, and he needed to regain his strength in order to return to Gotham and take back the mantle of Batman. Lady Shiva agreed to help train Bruce, which shows that despite the fact that these two have opposing alignments, that they both respect one another. Number 10. James Gordon Jr., also known as X-Strike. James Gordon Jr. is a sociopath who in the New Earth continuity believed that empathy made you weak, and set out to prove as much to Batman. While he is just a sociopathic murderer who enjoys hurting other people, James also happens to have a genius-level intellect, which is obviously a pretty deadly combination. In the story Black Mirror, he set out to administer medication he had made to infants which increases psychotic tendencies, a medication he himself was using, supplementing the meds that would have helped to subdue those tendencies and calm those instincts within him. It took a while before the Bat family or the Gordons managed to figure out that something was not right when James returned. Although at least his dad, Commissioner Jim Gordon, had instincts that something was pretty much up right away and decided to follow those, which ultimately allowed James's plot to be uncovered and for him to be apprehended in the end. In the Prime Earth continuity, he was part of the Suicide Squad and was known for being their analyst. James also seems to be one of those villains who dies in stories but then always somehow comes back. I feel like he's done that at least a couple times, so although he's dead right now, he'll probably come back at some point. If I was writing, I'd bring him back. I like James Gordon Jr. Number 9. Holiday. Holiday has to be one of the most unexpected villains in Batman and Gotham's rogue gallery, and an accomplished unexpected villain at that. Holiday was a serial killer who seemed to be targeting the criminal mob family known as the Falcones with his targets. However, then the Maroni family was also targeted, another massive crime family in Gotham. This created a lot of tension between Sal Maroni and Carmine Falcone, the head of both families respectively. However, in the end, Holiday wiped out not just many of the people and members of the Falcones, but also killed various members of the Maroni family as well, with the killings taking place on holidays. In the end, Batman and Jim Gordon managed to apprehend Holiday, but only after he had successfully killed Sal Maroni on Labor Day. Holiday turned out to be the youngest son of Carmine Falcone, Alberto, who wanted to prove himself and get revenge for being excluded from the family business. Although in reality, this was pretty much done to protect him. Wow, that's unfortunate. Holiday would later face off with Calendar Man, and after being wounded would be smothered to death by his sister. Tragic. Number 8. Calendar Man. Well, of course I gotta put Calendar Man above since he beat Holiday, and that's how it goes. For a guy that pulls off crimes inspired by different holidays, seasons, and calendar dates, Calendar Man can actually be surprisingly successful and terrifying. In his first encounter with Batman, Calendar Man managed to pull off 4 crimes successfully before he was caught. Aside from that, over the years, Calendar Man in the comics has taken his crimes to the next level, even going so far as to murder families as part of a Thanksgiving Day crime spree, sitting down to steal a plate of dinner after successfully wiping out an entire targeted family. That is pretty dark. Of course, Calendar Man's weakness tends to be similar to Riddler's, namely that he leaves clues as to how to capture him often, and we always know his crimes will revolve around notable days in the calendar, so makes it pretty easy to watch out for him. Like, is a holiday coming up? Well, we should probably watch out for Calendar Man. Number 7. Owlman. Pretty much everything about Owlman from Earth 3's crime syndicate is unexpected. He's the evil counterpart to Batman, but is not Earth 3's version of Bruce. Instead, he is Thomas Wayne Jr., who on his Earth was Bruce's older brother. He himself plotted to kill his parents as he believed they were mismanaging their wealth, which would of course end up being his inheritance. In the end, Bruce refused to help Thomas and even attempted to convince him to halt his plot. So Thomas Jr., saddened, was forced to kill his brother, having had much higher hopes for young Bruce. Thomas would then become Owlman and use a combination of fear, wealth, and influence to take control of Gotham. Still missing his brother, he decided to find someone to fill that hole in his heart. After meeting Dick Grayson at the circus, Thomas orchestrated the death of his parents in secret and then offered him support and a home, manipulating him into becoming his sidekick, Talon. Yeah, pretty shocking stuff. Number 6. Hush. Hush has managed to pull off some of the most horrific schemes over the years and gotten under Batman's skin many times, and Catwoman's skin even, when he literally stole her heart. Thomas Elliot is not only a powerful villain because of his intense vendetta against the Wayne family and Batman, but because he also is often shown to have the skill and strength to match Batman, as well as the cunning. He has taken Batman in hand-to-hand combat and fared surprisingly well, and he's managed to set into motion outlandish plots like impersonating Bruce Wayne by giving himself plastic surgery to make himself look nearly identical, then capturing and threatening the real Bruce Wayne with murder and disfigurement so that he could ultimately take his place. Number 5. Darkseid. I know what you're thinking, but Amanda, none of us are surprised that Darkseid is super powerful. It's, you know, kinda his thing. I know Darkseid is super powerful. But remember earlier on when I said that some villains are simply surprising because they happen to go toe-to-toe with Batman at all? Well, Darkseid is one of those villains. Because he's just so powerful, it makes little sense that Batman would even be able to face him. I'm not knocking Batman here, by the way. way, just acknowledging that he, at the end of the day, is just a very well-trained, skilled, rich man in a bat suit. So yeah. And yet he has also managed to defeat Darkseid on more than one occasion, which is only even more unexpected and surprising. But I guess it's these unexpected storylines that we find so exhilarating and help to sell comics. So when it comes down to why they were written, it actually makes a lot of sense. It's the unexpected matches that are the stories people get excited to write and fans get excited to read. Number 4. Harley Quinn. Harley is just unexpected because of, well, I mean, where she started from in the Batverse. She was introduced in the Batman animated series as Joker's sidekick and girlfriend, and she became such a fan favorite that she was made a regular there, even though she was kind of intended to be a one-off character, and would eventually make her way into the comics as well. From there, Harley's popularity meant we'd see her win all kinds of victories, or at least almost win them, and in the animated series she'd also prove how dangerous she was when she came up with some of the most potentially successful schemes, which of course often irritated her partner in crime and her partner in life, Mr. J. Over the years, Harley has become so successful and powerful, in fact, that she has moved more and more away from being a villain and more towards heroic acts, with her now even becoming one of Batman's sidekicks in the comics. For a human, Harley is also shown being very strong, flexible, and durable, in addition to being brilliant, often using her intellect or her unpredictable craziness to outsmart many of her opponents. Let's just remember that at one point she took on Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman all at once, and was actually successful in that encounter. Number 3. Poison Ivy. I mean, we all know how powerful Ivy is at this point, but it should also be acknowledged that initially she was just a student studying to be a botanist who ended up being used in her teacher's / lover's twisted experiment. She then became something new, something deadly, the villain and creature we'd come to know as Poison Ivy. Ivy was initially shown to be immune to all poisons and was interested in crime for basically the sake of status and power, able to use pheromones and kisses to influence her enemies. The power of seduction. I don't know what this is. This is seduction, apparently. Since then, Ivy has come a long way at one point, even taking control of the whole world, controlling everyone's minds through plant life that they had consumed. She also became a full-on terrifying eco-terrorist, and since the very real and also fictional world of eco-horror continues to grow, so does Ivy's power and presence in the comics, especially now that she's returned to her more traditional, villainous ways. Which is also kind of unexpected, because she was down this hero path and then they were like, she's a villain again. I was like, huh? Alright. Number 2. Karma. Just because you are considered a low-level thug, or in Fleet Delmar's case a supposed freedom fighter, doesn't mean you can't rise above your rank and become something greater. That is just what Fleet did. He ended up getting his hands on some alien tech that allowed him to move up to the next level when it came to his rank as a threatening and powerful Batman villain. He was supposedly apprehended by Batman years before, who had tormented him with fear gas as punishment for his crimes. It's pretty harsh, really. This experience apparently led to him losing his eyes and becoming blind, which is why he decided to seize the alien tech and use it to get revenge. The helmet he wore granted him psychic powers, allowing him to read the minds of his opponent and counteract their attacks easily in a fight. The helmet also allowed him to absorb energy blasts, which at one point allowed Karma to take on both Black Lightning and Batman at the same time. And then he went on to have a semi-successful career with the League of Assassins, so I mean, he died, but still, pretty crazy for just like a low-level thug in my opinion. Number 1. Phantasm. Phantasm is of course unexpected given that she had a secret identity, and in the animated series we even expected her to be a he instead of a she, so that's pretty unexpected. Andrea Beaumont is also one of those very powerful and strong villains for the fact that she holds a lot of sway over Bruce Wayne, being one of his love interests as well. Not only that, but when it comes to many of her skills and her physical prowess, she's often shown to match Batman and be on a very similar level to him, which is of course quite impressive because Batman is pretty crazy. Andrea is also surprisingly more ruthless in comparison to Bruce, having no qualms with killing those who cross her, whereas Bruce typically holds back from killing, at least in the current continuity. In his original days, not so much. So not only does she potentially have him as an ally at times, but she also has all the skill, strength, and know-how to use their relationship and her knowledge of Bruce to her advantage when playing the role of antagonist.